This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not investment, legal, or financial advice. Opinions are those of the host and guests and do not reflect any affiliated entities. Investing involves risk, and past performance is not indicative of future results. The host and guests may hold positions in discussed securities. Now, please enjoy the show.
Santi, thank you so much for joining me today. Super excited to chat with you. All right, so sir, you are the founder of Inversion, which is a private equity fund focused on transforming traditional businesses using crypto infrastructure, products, and tools. We'll dive obviously way deeper into that. You're a former partner at the multi-billion-dollar crypto investment firm ParaFi. You're a prolific angel investor with, I think, roughly 200 angel investments right now, right? Yeah. That's incredible. And you previously worked in TradFi at places like JP Morgan, Sageview Capital, and more. Mm-hmm. All right, so let's take it all the way back. What initially got you interested in the world of finance?
Oh God, well, I'll credit my mother for that. She would always take me to the supermarket. Anytime I was laying around in my house and I had nothing to do, my mom would have a knack of knowing immediately and saying, "You're coming with me," and she would take me to the supermarket. And that's where I first started paying attention to, well, why is it that people buy a certain product versus another? Like aisle placement, detergent, like if it's the same detergent, like a commodity product, like why do people go to Tide where the ingredients the same? And I was just obsessed at an early age about understanding the psychology behind those choices in particularly seemingly commodity products, but some which just commanded a premium. And I was just obsessed about that. I started my business when I was in high school, tutoring my friends first, and then started tutoring other people to prepare for standardized tests like SAT and the GMAT. And that's where I really appreciated the power of technology. Like I just came to terms that business was never going to grow to a point where it would give me financial freedom and independence, because it's always constrained by the number of hours in the day that I could tutor my friends, and then I could only hire so many people. And so that business has a natural limitation of that. And then I was like, okay, this is not a business that I ever want to own. And it could be a lifestyle business, but it's not a really breakout business. And so to me, that was a big insight into then understanding, okay, what is this business worth? And how do I value this business? Because I was going to college, I wanted to sell it. And I ended up selling a big part of it to my partner. And in that process, I really just wanted to do politics then and there. But, the combination of tapping into what I think is finance, which is it's a very psychological sport, and I love psychology, combined with that experience of starting a business at an early age and understanding, okay, what is this worth? Why is it worth that? And then that led me to really appreciate technology, and the combination of finance and technology has been like a common, like those two pieces merge and fuse early on in my life. And that really laid the path towards like every decision that I've made after that was very much going back to those two kind of formative episodes of my life.
At JPM and Sageview, were you focused on tech in your job there, or what was that? What were you doing over there?
Yeah, JP Morgan, it was tech. A lot of the deals that I did were tech. I was in this group called Financial Sponsors, which in other banks is called the Private Equity Group. So we would be doing investment banking and advising private equity funds when they would do large leverage buyouts. And so I always knew that I wanted to be on the other side. I wouldn't want to advise a client. I would want to be doing the actual transaction, but it was a great education. I mean, JP Morgan, in my mind, is the best investment bank in the world. And I got to work on some really large, really good transactions working with the private equity funds that I eventually wanted to be a part of and work for. And so it was a great stepping stone. A lot of the transaction that I did, I was very adamant about being in any technology related transaction, like GoDaddy, for instance, or Dell, the buyout. Like a lot of these private equity funds are acquiring tech businesses. And so I really wanted to focus on that. And Sageview was a growth equity fund, meaning you're investing not super early stage, not private equity, which is, very late, established business. It was at that intersection of taking a business that has gotten some traction and really like institutionalizing a lot of the processes and scaling it from like 10 million in revenue to, 100 million plus. And it was started by two partners that were the first associates at KKR. So like really long time track record. And it was very, very hands-on approach. Like it wasn't traditional private equity, but it was like very hands-on, taking a reasonably successful startup and like scaling that and taking it public. And so that was a great learning experience. And it was all tech. It was like investing in software as a service, which was, really big at the time and still is. But the dimension that became really relevant because I started investing in Bitcoin when I was at JP Morgan, like, by night, couldn't really tell anyone. But that was 2012. And then at SageView, which was 2 years later, we were investing in open source software. And this was at a time where most venture capitalists didn't really understand how you could invest in open source and actually make money out of it, because it's sort of like a oxymoron. Like, how do you monetize open source software? And that was like a big thesis of the firm. Like stuff like Red Hat and Mongo and all these different like providers, that eventually people came to realize that you could monetize open source software. You could layer services on top of that. But it has its own challenges and limitations. And so when Ethereum came along, it was a big insight, which was like, okay, that's this is really cool and interesting because it's open source and it solves a lot of the issues that traditional open source development has, which is, you look at the inventor of the internet, Tim Berners-Lee, you look at the inventor of Linux, they didn't make much money out of it. And that's always been the issue with open source development, which is, how do you fund it and how do you maintain the repo? How do you reward contributors for, their time and their contributions? And it's really hard. And to me, that's always been like the most important thing about crypto, is you have the ability to map contributions and giving them value and attaching value to that contribution and for open source development. And open source development is, you talk to anyone, the smartest people, the smartest developers, they all tell you they will prefer open source development. And because the pace of innovation is far greater than closed source systems. The ability, like from a security standpoint, like anything that's open source is constantly being battle tested, and there's more Lindy effect to that. Like every server runs on like Linux, like there's a reason for that. And so at that moment in my life, I took the really long-term view that something good would come out of crypto, because it was open source and it solved a lot of the issues that traditional open source development had. And so candidly, like looking back throughout my journey, if there hadn't been like very specific singular moments, I don't know if I'd be here talking to you about like, or any of what would happen later would happen. It's kind of crazy to think that. Like, there's specific people that have been champions in my life. There's specific moments of a podcast that I listened to that, had I not that not happened, like it would have been like parallel universe, probably would have been like still at like private equity or whatever.
That's crazy. All right, so you said 2012 Bitcoin. That's extremely early. Tell me about that, because JPM, not known for being very pro crypto, even today. How did you stumble into? Well, yeah. So I guess Jamie Dimon, not very pro crypto. JP Morgan, the firm, actually has been involved in blockchain and crypto for quite some time. But so 2012, how did you discover it? How did you find it? And was it like you stumbled into it, or did you read about it, or how?
Very much stumbled into it, like reading about it at our Bitcoin channel, like stumbled upon the white paper. And there were some news clips about like crazy surge in price for this thing, like magical internet money kind of thing. And naturally, I love Harry Potter, and so that headline definitely caught my attention. But yeah, it was like really late one night. I was like waiting for a prospectus. We were like waiting for the books to print, like a JP, like late at night, investment banking. And I read that white paper, and I had studied, taken some courses in game theory at school. And so the like solving Byzantium's general problem, like optimizing that payoff was like, to me, like really fascinating, combined with the idea that I grew up in Mexico. And so for me, that the finance is broken when you go international and moving money cross border. The amount of fees, time, FX conversion, like all of that was something that I was thinking about at the time of like solving it, because it's always bothered me that the people that really need it the most are the ones that are really hosed by the traditional financial system, because the lower the transaction value, if you're sending millions of dollars cross border, you don't necessarily care for if you're paying $25-$50 for a wire transfer fee. There were some times at JP Morgan we were funding multi-billion-dollar deals, and the wire almost didn't get through the line, and the entire transaction would fall apart. Like, it's kind of crazy to think that to this day. But it's really going back to like when you're sending like less than $100 and you get charged $25, like that's untenable, and that's really bad, right? And so Bitcoin for me was like, okay, can this actually serve as a way to move money cross border as a vehicle? Not so much the instrument itself is volatile, but if you're sending it through and it takes like, a couple minutes, you can hedge that volatility, but you could use that as a international payments flow kind of rails. And I just tinkered with it. It took me a couple months to buy it and figure it all out. And I sent it to a bunch of people down in Mexico and said, well, if they can convert it to local currency, then this alone is tapping into the largest remittance corridor in the world, like U.S. Mexico, and that alone at the time, Bitcoin was less than $100. And so that was, to me, like, just that use case alone to this day is really powerful. That became relevant many years later when at ParaFi we're crystallizing our thesis of going really, really long decentralized finance. It was early.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, that's incredible. Okay, so.
But by the way, what I'll say is I didn't feel early back then.
Oh, yeah.
And that's important because, I want to make it relatable for listeners. Like, I don't think anyone has ever felt super early in crypto. Mm-hmm. And maybe you felt quite early when you were formalizing your thesis around NFTs. And I remember when I first learned about you, I was at ParaFi and I was like, wow, this guy is raising a fund for investing in NFTs. Like, that is super ballsy. I felt we were ballsy doing DeFi before it was DeFi. And I said, wow, this guy's really going out in the land, like really far out. But you probably, I don't know. I never felt early DeFi. There's always someone that is earlier than you. And so it's just important because whenever, anytime like people want to learn about crypto, they feel that FOMO / I'm too late. The train has left the station. And I've said it many times. Like, I think I am earlier today than what I was back then. There's just some gravity around appreciating that it's actually going to work, and it's going to work in areas that I never conceived in 2012. I never conceived 2-3 years ago. And there's something just very real about seeing it work. And you're like, okay, it can work, and it can work in a very big way, far more than what I initially conceived. And that to me just maybe by default, like I'm contradicting myself. Like it's not early if you kind of appreciate that, but it's early because the aperture by which I think this space is really going to impact everything that's going on in the world today, including AI, most relevantly, it just makes it feel like it's so early.
Yeah, no, it's funny you mentioned that because I think at least my experience in crypto is similar. I've always felt late, no matter no matter what I'm doing. And when I was buying Bitcoin in 2013, I thought I was like, man, I'm totally gambling. Like, it's already gone up so much; it's at $200. And I feel like it could easily crash. I could lose all my money. I was spending a few grand or whatnot, but I felt super late. And yeah, it's just the story of, I don't know, if you find a wave, you kind of build a conviction and you stick to it, and then you stick to it for years and decades, and hopefully some cool things happen. But all right, so that was on Bitcoin. And then, what stage did you learn about Ethereum? Because in my mind, you're talking about remittance, massive use case. You're talking about value, kind of like money. Ethereum represents, or maybe it wasn't Ethereum as your first kind of smart contract protocol, but for me, it represented kind of oh my gosh, you can build things. Like, that's totally different than Bitcoin. Like, that's crazy. What was your first exposure to like a smart contract platform where the aperture widened massively for you?
Talking about it before Ethereum, and I think it's important to document it because Ethereum certainly wasn't the first to try to do this. Like, there were MadeSafe and Golem and a few other projects that preceded Ethereum, which, by the way, had very technical, competent developers. Like Golem, MadeSafe was, the thesis on MadeSafe was like, this is like a smart contract replaces your law firm or legal contract kind of thing. And it was certainly like really useful. And I thought that I definitely ascribed to that thesis. And so bought a bunch of MadeSafe with some Bitcoin that I had. It was a combination of things. Like, there was a lot of gridlock within the Bitcoin community and miners and developers to harden the protocol, probably too early. And now it's kind of rewarding to see the space flourish a bit more with some of the activity that has happened with the Taproot upgrade. But I felt that there was much more to than just Bitcoin digital gold. And when I first learned about smart contracts, it wasn't Ethereum. It was these earlier projects that tried to do it. And that really resonated with me from at the time, and still I am investing in like software as a service. You say, okay, you combine a lot of these elements to like basically Bitcoin is one instantiation of what is like immutable contract, like that makes it a hard asset, Austrian economics, but like nothing really stops you from doing much more than that. and like layering on a layer of expressibility to a smart contract. So Ethereum I learned about it through like, I think Chris Dixon like tweeted about it, or like, well, there was a podcast, and, I looked up to Chris Dixon. I mean, he's a renowned investor, and I was, a young associate at this like growth equity fund. And I was like, okay, well, I ought to pay attention to this. And I think Vitalik was doing the rounds in Silicon Valley at the time. And I didn't really think much of it. I mean, I hedged my exposure. For me, it was like buying Ethereum at the time was like, I'll hedge my exposure to Bitcoin kind of thing. Like, if this works, like, and it coincided with the time where the miner community in Bitcoin was like very gridlocked. And I felt a bit disillusioned at the time because I felt that the pace of innovation was just not there. And Bitcoin's obviously had a lot of success since then. But I'm far more interested in some of these other applications, and it was tempting not to get excited about something like that, which is like, a smart contract. Like, you hear about it and you're like, God, yeah. And you know why? Like, I feel like everyone can sympathize with. In my journey from investing, like, a key framework that I have is you have in your day to day, you have like friction, like an experience that is like has a lot of friction. Either it has cost or time or both. And you're left wondering, like, there ought to be a better way of doing this. You go to the doctor and they make you fill the exact same form over and over, and you're like, there ought to be a better way to do this in today's day and age. You're logging in hundreds of times. You're sharing the same information in an unsecured manner. Your lawyers are just slow and expensive. All of those experiences are just instructive in the same way that I was walking in a supermarket aisle and thinking about, okay, why do people do this? I'm like, well, why? Like, it's just like from first principles, like, there ought to be a better way of doing this. And when I hear something of codifying things in a binary and removing the uncertainty, and like an insurance claim, you have an accident, you think that you're covered, and then the insurance always finds a way not to pay you out. And if they do, they'll drag you out for 6 months. You're like, when you hear about smart contracts, I don't care if you like Bitcoin or you believe this space is a scam, but if you don't agree that there's a better way of doing claims processing and administration, if you don't believe that there's not a better way with like smart contract, then you're out of your mind, or you're in the mafia that is insurance. You know what I mean? Like, and so I just think that, like, to me, that's the more interesting component of all the entire space. And for that reason, I think we're early, because we haven't even scratched the surface of what we can do with smart contracts, because there's been regulatory bottlenecks, because we haven't been able to truly have the liberty to design these tokens in the way that they can and should. You know what I mean? Like, there's just, because the tech wasn't ready. You didn't have high throughput blockchains. Like, if you talk to Vitalik today, I think he'll tell you he wouldn't architect Ethereum the way that he did back then. Like, you would have like parallelization, you would have these things that, first mover advantages are very not there for open source networks. And so, but now we're coming to being. Now we're seeing, I think we're entering a golden age of crypto, which is you have the ability to more degrees of freedom, because the regulatory environment, because is more progressive, will allow us to like really think about that initial use case. Like, we don't, I think in crypto, sometimes we try to like boil the ocean and reinvent everything every 4 years. But it's also like probably more useful to go back and say why we're interested here in the first place. Payments, massive industry. So now you have stablecoins, and you even today Kraken rolls out payments, and you see Stripe, and you see a bunch of companies getting excited about stablecoins. And so payments is one, and the other one is, just this ability to, write immutable code that is very predictable in the way it behaves. And the idea of a smart contract, I talk to my friends at JP Morgan, and I tell them about DeFi without mentioning crypto, and they get incredibly excited because they can see a financial system where counterparty risk is very real, like it's very measurable, when you can in real time monitor the position of a money market, like or collateral in real time. The ability to like tokenize things and trade them 24/7, 365, not T+2 and Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we don't necessarily have to go too far out to get super excited that this space will grow far beyond 3 trillion. Far, far beyond. Like, Bitcoin's the least interesting thing about this entire experiment.
I love that. Okay. All right. So at SageView, or I guess after SageView, or no, At what point were you like, all right, TradFi is great, but it's for all the reasons and more you just mentioned that you're like, I need to spend my full time and attention on this crypto ecosystem?
At a very personal level, I have two older sisters. One of them is sick. And to me, it just was it made me question a lot of my journey and what I want to do with my life. And I said, well, it's not just about money. Of course, I was lucky at the time. I'd done well. I get paid reasonably well as an associate at any private equity firm. You could be there for life kind of thing. But it just didn't move the needle. I was young. I was in my early 20s. And so I was like, there's never a point in my life where I can take way more risk. And I should really lean into that. And I already have a space that I feel really passionate about. And it just became a nagging voice. It was just hard to overlook. I was just spending constantly all my time thinking about crypto. Combined with this idea that the world is a very unjust place. And there are systems that just shouldn't exist. Like financial institutions that charge you a lot of fees to move money. It's not that they're evil. It's just that that's just the current state of technology is outdated, right? But yeah, at a very personal level, like having one of my sisters just fall ill and she's still ill, like to me it was just like I want to do good. I want to truly have much more impact, and money for me wasn't. I don't know. I've always felt that I'm not afraid of losing money. I'm afraid of not being relevant. I'm not having an impact. And I think I just sort of felt that I can reinvent myself. If I lose money on one venture, I can just reinvent myself. I can make that money. Of course, I'm not stupid. I'm not going to bet the entire farm. I'll have a safety net. But I just felt that I wanted to dedicate my life to pushing the needle as much as I could to drive a positive impact. And I've always felt that crypto is that. Like I could maybe in another life go back and study medicine. I'm not good at it. So I'm aware of the things that I'm good at. I'm also acutely aware of the things I'm not good at. So I'm not going to be a doctor. And the closest thing that I can do is just empower people through investing in them to build systems that I think will truly transform how we operate. And I know it's difficult sometimes, maybe in your interactions too, you go and try to explain to people why crypto is relevant. And I say with a straight face, like, this is the most impactful socioeconomic transformation of our generation. And they're like, you're out of your mind. I'm like, okay, that's fine. It's fine. And you know what? You may not even remember what I told you, but I will tell you, when you open your phone in the next 5 years, you will be using this technology. You might not even know it, but you will feel it. You will definitely feel it. And the same way that you felt that a smartphone allowed you to browse the internet faster, buy books without having to go to a library, access information freely through Wikipedia, which went from being a non-established source in academia to being a cited source. For the world of AI, where you can tap in, like, all of these things like are incredibly transformational. I think crypto is in that journey as well. Like, we've been at it for over a decade. And things take time, but I'm of the mind that this truly is the most impactful socioeconomic transformation of our generation. It's the most impactful piece of technology because it allows us to coordinate better as species without trusting people, middlemen that shouldn't be there. And sometimes people don't appreciate that there's a middleman, but they certainly feel it because you have fees embedded, you have this friction. And again, you go back and you invert and you say, there ought to be a better way of doing these things. And I fundamentally think that, like, look at Stripe. They figured out, the Collison brothers are not dumb. They figured out that their next leg of growth had to be with stablecoins, because you cannot out-innovate your way out of a current system, which is a financial system that is a patchwork of systems that you reach a limitation point. And the next step function improvement is going to crypto, is going to stablecoins, like tokenizing things and moving them in a state ledger that is immutable and that is far more efficient. It's an open, transparent database, and that is super powerful. So anyways, because I'm not going to be a doctor in this lifetime, maybe in the next one, I get a lot of satisfaction in investing in people and empowering people through capital, and investing in people that have some crazy ideas and supporting them in their journey. And I think that, crypto's not perfect. It like every industry, there's a lot of speculation, which I don't think is bad. There's certainly a lot of fraud. Yeah, of course. There's crime. Yeah, of course. Like, name an industry that doesn't have that. It's just like a normal phenomenon. Now, the thing that is a bit difficult is that it's more visible in crypto because these are open, transparent systems. Oh, by the way, that's also kind of the upshot here, which is you're able to track it faster. You're able to, law enforcement can actually go and, police and fight crime this way. You can't do that necessarily with cash. You can't do that in other places. You might be oblivious to the fact that crime is happening, but yeah, you best believe that it is happening. It's not a crypto problem. Crypto is that state where you're able to see it more easily. It's so transparent. You can't actually hide it. So anyways, not to get into a long tangent, but sometimes it has been hard, believing that this will truly will reach the end state of this technology truly impacting most people's lives. We'll tie that in later to why I'm building now Inversion. But I still think that. And when FTX goes down, when Terra blows up, when there's all these hacks, I'd be remiss not to acknowledge that. But I constantly remind myself of talking to builders time and time. Whenever I have doubt, I go and talk to builders. And I still think the smartest people get excited about building in open source systems. And A's hire A's. And crypto has a lot of A's. And the smartest people want to work on hard problems. And crypto has a lot of hard problems. We're trying to reinvent the financial system. We're trying to reinvent how we coordinate as species. It's not a small task, but it has really competent, smart people. And the other exciting thing about it, I was spending a lot of time with someone that was super early on semiconductors. And, he was one of the earliest software engineers. He's quite old now. He's in his 80s. And we were talking about crypto, and it's actually funny, but people like that truly now appreciate crypto because you go talk to them and you say, well, about the whole, let's not forget, crypto, from a distributed systems, you have people in crypto to be competent in crypto. If you want to build a killer team, you need to have expertise on so many domains, from distributed systems, cryptography, software engineering, governance, political systems, economics, mathematics, hardware sometimes, you know what I mean? It's a very multidisciplinary field, but from a cryptography standpoint, quantum resistance and SHA-256 and what happens in a world of when quantum is here, building quantum resistant systems, all of that is applicable not just for crypto, but just for the real world as well. And so there's a lot of research that has been happening in crypto that is now applicable to AI and to other fields. NVIDIA basically didn't go bankrupt because it was, sustaining itself through building ASIC chips for crypto. But anyways, yeah, it's very rewarding to be in the space. And I always I'll trade any day of the week if you give me a bargain of saying, would you rather be more relevant or have more money? After a certain threshold, which is, by the way, way lower than most people think. After you make $150,000 a year, which, by the way, I appreciate is a lot, that incremental dollar doesn't move the needle. And at that point, you would trade more on the score of trading an incremental $100,000 of feeling more fulfilled and relevant. You would probably take, and it maybe take you some time to appreciate that. But for me, it was just very in my face when, unfortunately, I had this, family member. And for me, it was I want to be relevant. I want to feel that I'm contributing positively to society because life sometimes just whacks you and says, okay, life's too short. And so, I'd rather be building something that I get meaning out of.
So yeah, having this mission, having this passion, you decided to go full time. Did you know the guys from ParaFi before, and you're like, oh man, this is perfect. I can fulfill my dreams with these guys? Or how did you get to working with the ParaFi team? Well,
we were talking before we started recording about always second guessing yourself, and I always second guess myself. It just is always the case. So I've been successful, discovering crypto early on. I think it was a lot of luck. You lean into that, but it was luck, for sure. And then, did some SPVs. I had access to certain investment opportunities, Filecoins of the world, and, slowly grew my network. And, definitely 2017, a lot of ICOs and, just investing in many different projects, getting close to some like synthetics early on. But, I was very cognizant that I needed more kind of rounds to develop my investing muscle. And there's one thing to be successful as an angel or just with your prop capital. It's another to manage a fund and have institutional money and run a run it like such. And I felt that crypto had a lot of risk. It still does have a lot of risk. And I wanted to take time to, as opposed to jump in head on, right? Oh, I've 100x my portfolio. I can be the best investor in the world kind of thing. Like, no, definitely not. But, there came a moment in time where I felt that I was a bit more ready to manage institutional money. At the time, I was exploring joining a firm like A16Z. I felt that they had a great brand, a great stepping stone in my career. I wanted to be in a place that had a big microphone to just evangelize crypto. And, A16Z has a lot of that. And in that journey, a partner at Bain Capital, who was an early investor in ParaFi, said, hey, you ought to meet Ben. I think Ben was at KKR. He left KKR. I was at SageView, which was a lot of the DNA of KKR. And so he felt that we would get along quite well. And we did. But Ben and I, met for literally 6 months or more. We were just talking all the time. And then eventually Ben came to me and said, you want to join? Like, why go join like A16Z? Come join ParaFi. And ParaFi was, a very small firm. Ben had remarkably started the firm like at the top of 2018 and survived. And yeah, it was actually exciting to join ParaFi super early in terms of funds under management. But I think Ben had built a survived, and I felt that I could work with him quite well, and we teamed up. But yeah, it was very rewarding to he had raised some initial money from a lot of partners at KKR. I think there's a Bloomberg article that was like Henry Kravis, just basically the godfather of private equity, like investing in a crypto fund. And, I'll credit Ben for that. I mean, I think like crypto at the time really needed that push of legitimization, right? Like, and I felt that I really wanted to join that effort to champion crypto. And I had the background to do it. Like, I'd been at JP Morgan, I'd been at SageView. These are places that, traditional allocators like look for to give you money. And so I felt, okay, well, this is where I can be most useful probably right now in the space, like legitimizing it at the time where crypto was very much like wild, wild west. And so that's how we got connected, and yeah, kind of the rest is history kind of thing.
That's awesome. Yeah. I know you guys, and ParaFi, I know ParaFi and did exceptionally well. So, I'm very, very happy with that. So at ParaFi, were you guys focused on tokens? Was it equity? Was it ICOs? Like, that was the very early days. So what were you guys really focused on at ParaFi? It
was 2020 when I joined. So the ICO days were very much gone. It was a bear market. We were kind of coming out of the bear market, and timing, as we were talking about before we started recording, is everything. And we catch the DeFi wave very early on. A lot of it, the philosophy of ParaFi was being active on chain is the best way to understand what is working, where the puck is going, and we had a very active strategy to just use protocols and get insight from what is working and what is not working. What is not working, then you go and fund a team that is building to solve that problem. And a lot of the investments that we made were not just decentralized finance like DeFi protocols. It was also infrastructure that would support DeFi. Like DeFi came to expose, like investing in a project like Augur, which is a prediction market. The first instantiation of it was great. Like we're fascinated by the idea of prediction markets. Like this could be truly transform media, how we consume it, how we surface insights from the kind of wisdom of the crowds. But Augur, for instance, didn't have, like, you couldn't settle the bet because you didn't have a stablecoin. And so it introduces just too much noise where like you're betting on an outcome, you might be right about the outcome, but you're settling in a volatile currency. Like it's just too much noise, right? So again, we were investors in Augur. But that insight led us to then realize, well, there ought to be stablecoins. And so then Maker naturally comes to light. And then we look at Maker and we say, oh, wow, we're using Maker. We have a credit fund where we're doing like stablecoin arbitrage, like between USDC and DAI, and then using Maker to understand how that works. You're like, wow, this is the bedrock of what could be a financial system on chain, because it programmatically allows you to mint a stable unit of account with a volatile collateral, which is Ethereum. And by the way, that collateral dropped 80% during the bear, but the value of DAI, the peg, maintained itself. And you're like, well, this is remarkable. Like, there are countries that don't survive that shock. And you had like something like Maker, and that was like when we started to really think about all of this. But you see the evolution of investing in something like Augur. That position didn't work out. It led us to understand that stablecoins were needed. And then we looked at Maker because it was, the central bank in DeFi before it was DeFi. And then we looked at Curve, and then we looked at Aave, and we looked at Compound. And then we look at other parts of the stack, and then we go and find Polymarket years later. And so I think that whole evolution that happened while I was at ParaFi is very instructive of the philosophy that we had, which is using these protocols constantly and gleaning a lot of insights from that. And so it was a great journey. It's a very private equity type of approach, which is hands-on in the good sense, not just barbarians at the gate, slash and burn. It was using these things and being active. We were we put forth a lot of proposals to the Lend to Aave migration, and that we were pretty active there. The tokenomic design is something that I really enjoyed doing before my days at ParaFi. And so all of that, I think, really contributed. I couldn't tell you one specific thing that led to our success. A lot of it was also timing. As I said, Ben had survived this bear, and we were able to just lean into that and then just grow. But it's a team effort. And, in investing, I think far too often, you're very right, and you think that it's all skill, and it's not the case. There's a lot of luck, and I'll tell you why. You try to replicate. You look at every single hedge fund, primarily hedge funds, because that's public data. There's this mean reversion is very real, and producing returns for a sustained period of time is very hard to pull off. It's a competitive market, and there's a lot of luck in this sport. And so it's not all skill. And I think it's sometimes hard to piece together what is luck, what is skill. You could look at the Sharpe ratio, look at alpha, all these different metrics. It's not perfect science. But what I'm trying to say is I think the best approach that I've always had is always not believing that there's luck will eventually lead you to do things that will most likely jeopardize, will likely make you blow up, kind of thing. Look at long-term capital management, 8 Nobel laureates or something like that. Really, their models were probably very sophisticated, very right, but they didn't factor in for the human irrationality that was Russia defaulting on their bonds, and they blew up in one day. And I think it's better to think that a large part of your success is luck, and work harder. And if you're skilled, it's good, but to think that your success is all tied to skill is, I think, I would caution people from doing that. I'm not in the business of giving advice, but I would just caution. And you see a lot of that, right? And especially in bull markets, everyone's a genius.
Okay, so after ParaFi, you've always been an active angel investor, but you've definitely, it's been some time post ParaFi that you were, I guess I would say, increase that angel activity. I don't know if that's completely okay.
Well, I funded 200 companies after I left ParaFi.
Oh, no. Okay, so that was after you left ParaFi.
In the last 4.5 years.
Wow. That's incredible.
Well, over those 4 years, there's so many VCs that didn't want to invest. But, you look at these rounds of Tensor, what I didn't participate in, but it was all angel led. Now it's a different state of the market. But yeah, I was lucky to have the resources to invest in founders over the last 3.5 years, where there was less capital available in the space.
Tell me about that your angel process, because my angel process is jump on a call, or I hear about the product, to jump on a call. I'm I really like this guy or girl, and I'll send a check, and it's very, very not diligent, and it's nothing at all similar to how we invest as a firm. But tell me about your angel process personally. Maybe
I'll give you a concrete example of a deal I recently did, and I think embodies a lot of what I look for in the process. It's not too dissimilar from yours, by the way. At the earliest of stages, you want to understand is this person or team going to drive through a wall to make this a successful thing? And I think the best founders that I've backed are slightly delusional and maniacal. They have a unique insight or unique insights that are very apparent, and they're only apparent because once they drop that insight, you're like, wow, why hadn't I thought about that before? And that's the hallmark of a unique insight, right? It's it just whacks you, and it opens your eyes to a different dimension. So in those 30 minutes, if a founder can't deliver a key insight, then I'll most likely pass. I'm looking for a team that has a unique insight. And most of the time they're obsessed about a particular problem at a very deep level. So they have a unique insight. A lot of that unique insight comes from a near-death traumatic experience. They either maybe got fired from a job, they were near bankruptcy. It's just a deep trauma and they never want to go back to that spot ever again. So that combination of deep domain technical expertise that comes from one founder combined with the grit of maybe another co-founder, that fusion and that trauma embedded in their unique experiences in life makes this like catalyzes this reaction where it's a team that is like driving through a wall. But they have unique insight. They need to be technical, especially in crypto. And they also they're very strategic in how they build. And I think that's where most of the teams that I've backed in crypto that maybe have had that DNA but weren't successful was because they truly didn't go about building something that the market would care about. And that's where I think most of the founders in crypto I think have fallen short. For instance, this last investment I did is Uranium Digital. Uranium Digital, they are building the first and only spot ETF for uranium. Like the price of uranium. It's crazy. And so I get on the phone with Alex, founder, and he says, I want to build this. I'm like, excuse me? Like this doesn't exist? Like I want to invest in nuclear energy. I've been tracking. I felt so dumb that I didn't know that there wasn't like a spot ETF for uranium. Turns out that you can only buy, like it's not physically settled and you can only buy like, if you want to get exposure to nuclear, you have to buy like a uranium producer or miner. And so it's difficult. Like, you can't track like the price of uranium is not like oil that you can reference. And that was like, okay, well, I'm really dumb. It made me feel incredibly dumb in that call in the first 5 minutes. And I said, okay, you got my attention now. And then he mentioned that he had obsessed about this problem. He was a nuclear bull. And the way he had gone about building it was going to one of the largest uranium players in the uranium market. And he went to them and said, I'm going to want to build this. I want you to help me understand how you want it to be built so that you're going to be my first customer. And that's really smart. Like that's the savagery in the good sense of the word that you need. You need to be very creative. And when I saw that, I'm like, all right, I'll back up the truck. And that I think is a hallmark of everything that I want to look for in a team. You know, do they have unique insights on the market? Do they have unique insights on how to go and attacking the market in a different way to capture it, to build like a monopoly, kind of like the Peter Thiel kind of thing. So it's that's just one example of and he doesn't come from a conventional background. It's not like he has like a nuclear domain expertise. He was just very smart in the way that he went about it, which is like, it goes two ways, right? Sometimes you want to invest in someone that has spent their entire career in a particular domain. But far too often I see people passing on a particular deal because the founder doesn't have a unique expertise, doesn't have like gray hair. I'm like, wait a minute. Go and look at Uniswap, which is probably the most successful DeFi project in crypto. And you had Hayden, who wasn't a developer, wasn't a coder, learned to code. He took an idea that Vitalik had posted in one of his blog forums and ran with it. And to me, that is and by the way, everyone that passed on Uniswap in the early days and even today will pass because they come from traditional finance, right? And they'll say, no, wait, an AMM is never going to be superior than a centralized order book model. It's just not. And I'm like, you're absolutely right. Objectively, you're right. But can you appreciate that an AMM allows you to, it just builds more consumer preference. It allows anyone to be a market maker. It may be a really good instrument to trade in and out of a position, right? If you put liquidity of, not to get too technical, but if you provision liquidity in AMM with Ethereum and USDC, if you have a lot of ETH, maybe you want to hedge ETH. And maybe you want to sell out of it, like, in that curve. If ETH really runs up, you're going to be constantly selling ETH and rebalancing to buy more USDC. That's a natural mechanism to rebalance your portfolio 50-50 and to get fees while all of this is happening and earn yield on it. So who's to say that, like if you take a strict definition of what a particular product like a centralized order book model should be, or how exchanges should be built, you're likely going to not capture some of the more frontier pieces of innovation that have produced a lot of value. And when you look and you say that this is not just a crypto phenomenon, like you have a lot of the breakthroughs in medicine have happened by people that are not doctors or people that are not like in the field. And it's just a constant reminder that, for me at least, to look out for people that are sufficiently crazy and maniacal, but also delusional in how hard it's going to be to build. Maybe Alex in Uranium Digital, shout out to Alex, is slightly delusional in thinking that he's going to be able to pull this off. But here's the thing: if you don't buy a lottery ticket, it's the surest way you're never going to win. So, insofar as much as your economics professor will tell you that the buying a lottery ticket is negative EV because the probabilities are stacked so against you, that is a wrong mindset for venture. That is a wrong mindset for a founder, because if you never believe you're going to go to Mars and you never buy that lottery ticket, we're definitely not going to go to Mars. But you need to have a crazy person like Elon Musk say, I want to fucking go to Mars. And I'm willing to bet all of my stack. And he's done that 3 times or 4 times in his career. With PayPal, with Tesla, with SpaceX, with Starlink. You mean, like, you need to have people like that want to buy that lottery ticket. And they should be rewarded exceptionally. Like, yes, he should be the richest guy in the world because he did that. When you have 99% of the market, it's like your economics professor that that is too afraid, too conservative. I want to find those type of founders. And so a long-winded way of saying, like, I don't know, I wanted to give concrete examples like Uranium Digital and Uniswap, like, but I also, maybe as a last point, I only want to invest in people that obviously have a high ethical standard, that want to do good, not just have an impact, just want to do good. Because there's a lot of things you can invest in, but I do want to I do focus on that a lot. And it's like, there are deals that I pass on where I probably think, yeah, this will likely be very successful. It will make me money. But I'm like, no, life's too short to be working with people that I don't want to pick up the phone at 4 a.m. on Friday night or 2 a.m. Friday night if they have a problem. Like, I want to be that first. It's a very intimate relationship that you have with your founders, right? It's like a family. You're a therapist more so than a financial kind of wizard or whatever you want to call it. Like, you're there to help the founder, not to give advice, but just to be a sounding board. And the commitment that I make when I am making an investment in the team is, will I be willing to pick up the phone Friday night if they call me with a problem or that they just need to walk through a particular issue that they're having? And if the answer needs to be fuck yes, because if it's not fuck yes, it's fuck no. And there's no middle line kind of thing.
That's great. All right. So building off that, and you kind of answered my question a little bit, but I'm curious anyways. Do you invest in certain themes? Are you like, okay, well, I'm a big believer in stablecoins, therefore I want to have a lot of allocation stables, or I don't know, I want to do the newest L1s, or are you just like really founder focused versus kind of market focused?
A little bit of both, for sure. There's some sectors that I'm closer to and that I do track, like, my allocation to AI, to DeFi, metaverse gaming, certain ecosystems. It's a useful metric to, but it's not hard and fast. I'm never passed on a team that I feel really strongly about at a human level, and because it doesn't fit a theme that I have. And that's the benefit of now running my family office. Like, I have all the degrees of freedom. You're talking to the entirety of the investment committee right now. You know what I mean? Like, I will make a decision on the spot. Most of the time it's on the spot. I'm talking to someone like you mentioned earlier, like in the 30 minutes, I'm like, yeah, I'll want an allocation, I'll invest. But there are areas where I am very mindful and of, hey, I want to increase my allocation to X. And for instance, 2 years ago, I said, I want to increase my allocation to Solana and the Solana ecosystem. And I was intentional about it. And I went out and, did things in the portfolio. And a lot of times, like, for instance, if I'm investing in, like, a particular ecosystem, like Solana or Movement or Aptos or, Avalanche, I want to be the way I think about it is I'll make a commitment of 100 in particular ecosystem, and then I carve out like another 100, 200, or 300 to invest in that ecosystem to support it, to de-risk, you know what I mean? Like it's sort of a levered bet. And that's how I just, these are directionally some like frameworks that I have, but none of it is hard and fast. It's a lot of times what you said earlier. It's a very, do I like this team? Are they building something that I think can be big, venture like scale returns, and is it the right time?
Do you LP into any funds?
Oh yeah, I was an early LP in Multicoin.
Oh wow!
I stumbled upon Kyle and Tushar's writing very early on, and I was like, yeah, these guys are thoughtful, very thoughtful, and they're most likely going to capture alpha that I don't. And it was sort of a hedge against myself. I'm like, if I don't capture it, they will. Turned out to be very true. They were invested in Solana, and I wasn't. Like at that early stage, I wasn't. And other stuff like Helium and whatnot. And so it was very useful because having invested in them, I learned a lot. I still am learning a lot from them. And so, I then was able to really recalibrate and update my thesis on Solana thanks to them in large part. But yeah, I've invested in Casey's fund, Topology. I've known Casey for years. We've done deals together. She's a phenomenal investor, very technical, has a very unique edge. I want to get more exposure to AI. I don't want to do it in a direct manner because I have no edge in AI. You know what I mean? If I'm doing an AI deal directly, it's because 99% of all the smart guys in AI passed on it. But I know Casey will be there at the ground level. And I've invested in 2 AI funds and many other crypto funds actually, like Six Man. Obviously, still investor in ParaFi. What else? Folius, which is. I helped Jason, really encourage him I wanted to hire him initially, and then he left. And his whole MO was capturing like Asia and that market. And he's Chinese, he went back to Hong Kong. And I just felt like, look, in order to tap into that market, you need to be local. You need to speak the language. You need to understand and build those relationships. And Dragonfly had had done it. I felt that there was an opportunity to have many more funds, right? So yeah, I really, I've definitely invested. I'm happy to pay 220 to someone that is smarter than I am and doing a lot of the work. And yeah, for sure, active management is well worth it if you're in the right funds.
That's awesome. All right, so we've talked about your background and your journey into crypto and your thoughts and theses around the whole space, your personal investing. Let's talk about Inversion. I'm really excited about what you're building here. So what's your overall investment philosophy around Inversion? Because it's pretty unique.
Yeah, well, so in over the last 4 years, I've constantly asked myself one thing is where can I have the most amount of impact? And I think by virtue, from my vantage point of, looking through my portfolio, I came to the 2 conclusions, the conclusion to build Inversion really predicated on a couple insights. The first one was the tech is very much ready. Like high throughput blockchains, you see the activity that's happening in these high throughput blockchains, Solana, Avalanche, like it's ready. Like we don't have a problem of demand, like block space. We have a demand problem. There is not enough. We have a go-to-market problem. And when I looked at the failure rate and the companies in my portfolio that have failed is because really one single reason, which is there just wasn't a market. No one really cared about what they were building. And it's good tech, but we don't have enough users. And so that really led me to start thinking, okay, how can I solve this? Like what can I do to like accelerate the adoption of crypto? And also observing, look, I'm an investor in Pump.Fun. I've changed my tune on meme coins. I don't have any issues against speculation. It is an onboarding mechanism. It always has been for any piece of technology, but we can't just stop there. And I looked at my portfolio and said, I started noticing the highest quality founders were DePIN founders that came from years and years of experience, like Helium guys, Andrina. And I said, okay, I went to them and said, guys, like, why isn't Helium everywhere in the world? Or why don't we have internet service providers like everywhere in the world? Like, why? What's stopping you from growing 10x? And they're like, capital. I'm like, excuse me? I'm like, what if I gave you $100, $200 million? They're like, their eyes just was like, it was like, oh, we would do this and this and this and this and this. And I'm like, okay, well, hold my beer. Let me go get that for you. And let me do that for you. That was all I needed to hear. To then say, okay, we can meaningfully accelerate the adoption of crypto. And we have to go through it in a different funnel because the current funnel of crypto is not good enough. It's broken. You go through an exchange. That user is purely coming in because he wants to buy Trump coin. And yeah, you could argue all day long that the retention is going to be there, that they're going to stick around, that the Coinbase user is going to onboard a base and then use all these different things. The reality is the retention is really poor. And Rob from Dragonfly did an incredible analysis that just validates this. If you don't believe me, go and look at the data. The retention, yeah, sure, a lot of people came in over the weekend to buy the Trump coin in the kind of million range, but then the retention was very low. And it shouldn't, because you have killer like, what is the thing that is unequivocally, you go to your Thanksgiving dinner and you tell people, my primary example is DePIN. I'm like, there's a thing called Helium Mobile that costs $20. It's feature parity with any other mobile service. Like, why wouldn't you, with your right mind, buy the Helium Mobile plan versus paying $100 at AT&T? And no, it's just like, you're either irrational and you like burning money, or you migrate over. And same with wireless, right? Andrina, like it's you have wireless at your home for like $20 versus 120 with Comcast. Like, pound for pound, there's no reason why you wouldn't use the crypto alternative. And by the way, the user doesn't even know it's happening. And this is, again, going back to the earlier discussion, this is the end state of crypto, is the technology is being used without people noticing that it's being used. And I've been captivated by that. And then I've been in this journey for over a year of saying, which business can I buy at the most attractive price that has great distribution? Because I never want to build distribution. Crypto has been trying to build distribution inside out, exporting this technology inside out. By the way, I've been sitting on a chair doing a podcast trying to convince people that this is the most impactful socioeconomic transformation of our lives, and they will not care. They will not listen. So I said, well, what if I know that there's an alternative here? I've done private equity before. So why try to convince a business to use crypto rails to streamline their operations? I can just go buy and acquire that business and do that transformation myself and get paid for it. And it was just like, it sounds obvious now, but I'm like, okay, well, someone's got to do this. Like Apollo, KKR, all these firms will eventually do this playbook. And I started looking at different types of businesses and where could I do this? And I'm of the mind today that the best business to acquire, because both the challenge and the opportunities, you could theoretically run this playbook in any business, will eventually adopt crypto. I'm of the mind. The question is, where can you do it today? And then that exercise over a year, I've come to the conclusion for Inversion that the best business to acquire is a mobile network carrier. Like, it's called a mobile virtual network operator, which means it's a mobile carrier that doesn't own any of the infrastructure. And a lot of it is inspired by what you're already seeing in the US with Helium Mobile. And why? Because anyone that is selling you your cell phone service lives with you 24/7. Your AT&T, Verizon, Mint, they know everything they live with you 24/7. So that, I feel, is the best distribution business, the best platform business to then activate that user base into crypto, right? Because you're paying for mobile. Say you're paying for your wireless service and it costs you $30, $20. All right, fine. Through that app that you're paying your subscription, you have the ability and the incentive to say, hey, maybe we're going to offer you a 10% discount if you pay with a stablecoin. You're like, with a what? You offer easy on and off ramp from fiat to crypto stablecoin. And then you that it's game over at that point. They start paying with a stablecoin for their mobile service. Once you have that, you offer them yield-bearing opportunities on their stablecoin to earn 4, 5, 6%. You all of a sudden have converted that user from being purely consuming mobile to offering fintech and mobile. And the ARPU for that user goes from 4, 5, 6, or $10, $20 to 20, 30, 40, 50, if not more. Because you are now servicing them and becoming the everything app for them. You give them mobile, which is a critical utility, to also offering them a checking and money market account, which is a stablecoin with the yield. Game over. The retention for that user goes up. By the way, on the cost side of the house, if you're any remotely familiar with what Helium does, is it allows you to cut costs 30, 40, 50% because you're buying data from a network of hotspots, not from one provider, which allows you then to acquire more users, to offer more incentives, to grow into the largest telecom business and bank in a region. And that's what I want to do with Inversion. I'm of the mind, and I'm on the journey to build the largest mobile, like the largest telecom and fintech company in Latin America, maybe even the world. But again, this is me being a little delusional, and I'm aware of that. But it starts with one acquisition of a company that has, millions of users, a mobile carrier that has millions of users, ripping the infra, putting in a network of hotspots, using something like Helium, and then using stablecoins. And by the way, that user in Latin America, in Mexico, Argentina, Uruguay, guess what? They all want to hold dollars, not local currency. They just don't know it yet. They don't know how. But you live with them 24/7. And they all want to use internet, and they all need a mobile plan. And I'm going to offer them a better mobile plan. My business is structurally more efficient because I save so much on cost because I deploy this hotspots, which are reliable. And I now have also increased wallet share and monetization of that user because I'm selling them mobile and products like, financial products that are using crypto. Now, you tell me which user is stickier and which user has a higher LTV. The user that comes in through Coinbase or Moonshot that just wants to buy Trump coin and is here because Bitcoin is at 100,000, or my user that comes into crypto without realizing that he's using crypto. What user is more valuable for the crypto economy?
That's amazing. Wow.
I mean, like just the LTV of the user in crypto today is very low. We're throwing these crazy incentives and to acquire users, but we shouldn't be doing that. Again, there ought to be a better way of doing these things. There ought to be a better way to go to market for crypto. And we should just look at ourselves, and maybe it comes from a point of insecurity of saying, this chip on our shoulder which says we got to prove ourselves, we got to go far above and beyond to prove the existence of this industry because we've been in this very hostile environment where people try to kill us. Well, guess what? We have built incredible technology and we don't need to justify our existence. We have killer products which are DePIN and stablecoins. We need to run aggressively at that. Let's stop kidding ourselves. Meme coins are fine. I don't have any problem with that. I have meme coins myself. I've invested in meme coins myself. They're fun. They provide entertainment value, but we can do far, far more than that. And in my journey building Inversion, I can tell you, I don't think the crypto industry appreciates the sense of urgency. We don't have another decade to onboard the next 100 million users. We have 4 years. And I do feel that urgency because I have a massive portfolio and 90% of my net worth tied to this space. And I want to build this because if it works, it's a win-win for everyone. Because I want to onboard the most amount of users to this space. And I'm of the mind, again, it goes back to the timing is right. You asked me 4 years ago when I left ParaFi, I couldn't have looked at you in a straight face because you didn't have DePIN in the way that you have it today, and you didn't have high throughput networks where you could credibly see a path, a very seamless user experience. Again, we need to abstract away all of the crypto side of things. And we're at a point today where that can happen. It's just a go-to-market problem, which is not the hardest problem that you can have. But we're not being realistic enough in crypto, and we're not being creative enough in how to acquire these users. And Inversion is really here and exists for that reason, because I want to grow that pie, and I think everyone wins. I'm not a chain maximalist. I am building it as a chain, but I think interoperability is a thing, and it will benefit. I will just route that transaction to the best protocol. Like Helium exists in Solana, right? I think Helium's great. I'm going to use Helium. I can use other protocols like in the Avalanche ecosystem and the Solana ecosystem. My philosophy of building is I want to partner with people. I don't want to build stuff myself. I'm allergic to building stuff. I'd rather connect. And that's what I'm good at. And so that's in the journey that I'm on right now. And you know what? People ask me like, to be fair, I never thought of myself as a builder. That was perhaps the biggest insight that I've had. It's like, I was sort of indoctrinated and led to believe that investors are not builders. And you hear that a lot, but I think that's the biggest fallacy because, you're building a firm. You're ultimately identifying people to give money. How is that any different from building a team? Like you're ultimately like, it's a human, like, in what we've talked about is you're identifying talent, you're giving them money. Here you're giving them equity. Like you're basically your role as an investor is the same as a builder, which is you want to inspire better people, smarter people to come join your effort or accept your money. And then your focus is to bring out the best in people, whether it's a founder you're investing in or an employee that you just recruited for your company. But you have to sell them on the dream, and you have to then give them enough degrees of freedom and create and the opportunity in the platform to get the best out of them and inspire them to do their best work. And I think the biggest challenge that I had with Inversion is not thinking big enough and kind of always handicapping how big it could be. And I'm like, now I want to build the largest economy, not the largest economy on chain, the largest economy, because I believe that crypto will be the settlement layer of the internet. And so if you bring every business on chain and you extend this playbook over and over and over and over, and you run like a Berkshire style model using treasury value to buy businesses and aggressively acquire customers, and you can become the largest economy. Like if everything flows on chain, you can become the largest economy. If I onboard billions and billions of users, that's where I want to go. And the other thing I'll mention is I'm building in the open. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want to invite criticism. I want to invite smarter people to come and join the effort. To me, that's a mechanism to recruit. Am I afraid to look like an idiot? No. Am I constantly second guessing my ability to build? Absolutely. But I say it over and over and over again to re-listen to this episode, or just as a way to publicly state what I believe in, to remind myself of what the mission is, and to also appreciate that there's a lot of luck, yes, but I will need a lot of help. It's like a Herculean task, and I'm not going to do this by myself. So I'd rather build in the open. And yeah, if you fall, it kind of, it bruises your ego probably marginally more. Like, it still hurts to fall. And no matter whether it's like you've seen that video of a baby that falls, and if their parents are not there, he'll just stand up and not cry. Well, guess what, folks? I'm just like, and if he falls and and the mom's there, he'll start crying. I just think, like, look, no one wants to fail, right? But I just think that, again, it's one of those things that if I couldn't live with myself if I didn't build this, because I think that this is the next evolution of how I want to express my interest in an industry that I feel that I'm incredibly fortunate and privileged to have discovered early on, that also coincides with the ability to be rewarded both financially but also emotionally and whatnot. And I just consider myself incredibly lucky to be living in this moment in time. And I think I have a moral responsibility to make the most out of that. And this is the next chapter of, I think, contributing to the space.
Amazing. Okay, so can you explain this? And we'll make a hypothetical scenario, just because I imagine that these telcos in, I don't know, Mexico, for example, there's got to be some monopoly that controls just the whole country or something. Just so in the States, it's like two companies. So is that the case? Are there a lot of small providers that you could take over and implement this new technology, or how is that look and feel?
Yeah, well, in the US you have like large telecom companies, but it's fairly it's quite fragmented too. Like you have like Mint Mobile, which is Ryan Reynolds' like mobile service. You have Sprint. You have AT&T. You have Verizon. You have T-Mobile. There's like a whole it's somewhat centralized. Yeah, there's like large providers. Internet service providers is also quite fragmented in the US, like the people that you have, like your home wireless. In Mexico, there historically has been a very large player, kind of a quasi-monopoly called Telmex. America Móvil is the name of the parent. But
doesn't Carlos Slim own that?
Carlos Slim at one point was the richest man in the world because he had a monopoly granted by the Mexican government for him. And data rates were incredibly expensive. I grew up in Mexico. It was expensive to have a mobile plan in Mexico, like among the highest in the world. I think Turkey and Mexico had, on a absolute basis, one of the highest, most expensive mobile plans in the world. Certainly as a percentage of like income. Yeah, it was really high. That has he's lost some share. There's been competitors that have cropped up, particularly MVNOs, like these mobile virtual network operators, like Walmart, for instance. Walmart Mexico, which has a very decent footprint like Walmart in the US, launched its own MVNO. Why? Because it has all these customers going into their stores. So, guess what? When you're checking out in Walmart store, they'll sell you their mobile plan. So what does Walmart do? They command so much market share and they have a lot of distribution that they have all the customer base. You're going to sell them mobile. They themselves then have to go to a partner. You're right. To go serve it. Like if you have like 1 million users that are consuming 30 gigabytes per month, you have to go and buy 30 million gigabytes contractually, some amount, at least 30 million gigabytes or whatever that is in terabytes or whatever, per month from someone that has the physical antennas, that has the, that data to sell you. And there's a number of providers that will sell you that data. So there's sort of a marketplace. But yeah, who you buy that from has been historically like a few handful of providers. So that rate can be quite high. In comes Helium, which is a mesh network of hotspots where you can buy from that network, decentralized network. And that's what makes Helium Helium, right? Because in the US, you have 27,000 hotspots where you, Andrew, can put it in your home, or if you have billboards or convenience stores, you can put them on all of those. And like, there's small hotspot deployers, there's medium to large size hotspot deployers. In the same way that you have Bitcoin miners, people buy the hotspot themselves, they'll deploy it, they'll contribute data to the Helium network, and then the Helium, the data plan, the one that's actually selling you the plan, will buy data from that network at a much lower rate. So in the US, the prevailing rate per gigabyte is $2 per gigabyte. If you're a Mint Mobile, like Ryan Reynolds, MVNO, he has a great brand, so he was able to acquire a lot of these customers. But he still pays per gigabyte like $2, $3 maybe, $1, no less than $1.50. Well, Helium you buy contractually at a fixed rate, 50 cents. So what you're seeing now, starting last summer, a lot of these MVNOs started buying from the Helium network. Why? Because it got to sufficient density. 27,000 hotspots. You look at the map. I mean, there's a lot of coverage. By the way, if you have an AT&T plan, Verizon, they don't have coverage in the entire continental United States. If you go to an area where they don't have coverage themselves, like they don't have antennas, like coverage, they'll have to buy that data from someone that does in that particular. Like if you're in the middle of Idaho and your provider or your mobile carrier doesn't have coverage, you'll have to buy that data from someone else. You won't see that, by the way. You'll still see in your antennas like, oh, I'm still, on the T-Mobile network, but they're buying that from someone else, and that has a different cost structure. But yeah, what makes Helium, these are the insights that I had. I'm like, okay, Helium is really powerful here. You have 27,000 hotspots. That's 13.5 million in capex. Like in aggregate, indoor hotspots are slightly cheaper, but on the high end, like hotspots are $400, $399. Outdoor hotspots, which have more range. So you take 27,000 hotspots times 400. That's like 13.5 million roughly of capex, right? And you're like, wow, that's not a lot of money in the grand scheme of things. And you've deployed a network that actually works. And why people are buying these hotspots, because they're mining Helium and getting the payback on that $400 investment is like a year or a year and a half, 432 days or whatever. Helium at $6. And it's the same properties of Bitcoin. What made Bitcoin is you had to have these crazy miners at some point believe that Bitcoin had any value to go and buy ASIC chips, first just GPUs and then ASIC chips, specialized hardware to mine and contribute energy resources that is a fixed supplied resource to mine Bitcoin. Like that's what makes Bitcoin like the hard asset. You had to have a finite resource like energy to make it valuable, right? The hash rate. You have millions and millions of like electricity being consumed. And so that's similar, no different than DePIN, right? So my thesis is, well, what if as opposed to waiting for everyone in the world to buy these hotspots and deploying themselves, what if you could do it at an industrial grade, which is I'll deploy 27,000 hotspots day one in Mexico. Day one, 13.5 million. I'll get to coverage. Why? Because instead of buying data, if I buy this MVNO that has like 20 million subscribers, well, imagine I take that business, instead of paying $2 per gigabyte, I'm paying 50 cents. That spread is massive. Again, going back to if the average user consumes 10 gigabytes, that's 200 gigabytes times $2 or versus times 50. That saving alone that month pays for the hotspot. And by the way, as a last data point, most MVNOs, again, mobile virtual network operators, their biggest cost structure is twofold. One, per gigabyte price on COGS, and then customer acquisition costs. That's it. The COGS side of the house is like at least 50% of the cost structure of that business. So what happens? Most MVNOs, their EBITDA margin is less than 10%. Every MVNO that I've looked at is 8%, less than 10% margin. It could be a good business at scale. Well, what do you think the margin is on that MVNO if you are then buying data at that material spread through a decentralized network of hotspots? 20%, 25%. The world has never seen an MVNO with that margin, cost structure. And you know what? That to me is really, like, I get incredibly excited. Imagine if I do this. I buy this MVNO and then the world sees, and in a year's time, I take it from a 5% EBITDA margin to 20 or 18. Because, you might not be able to offload all the data to the network. You're still going to buy some from AT&T or whoever. And everyone's going to be like, you can imagine the research analyst at JP Morgan does telco saying, wait a minute, an MVNO with a 20% EBITDA margin? Unheard of. What did you guys do? And you're like, okay, we did one transformation. We ripped and we replaced our COGS structure by deploying a network of hotspots. That's it. One thing. I didn't assume revenue growth. I didn't assume none of this crap that every private equity firm cooks up in their model. It's just one transformation. And that is what's needed for people to really wake up and say, oh, okay, crypto's far, far more than Bitcoin here. By the way, we haven't even talked about that user base, upselling them the bank account, stablecoins. How much more money do you think you make from that user base? That, by the way, wants to hold dollars, wants to send money cross-border to their relatives in US, Mexico. How much swap fees does MetaMask make in Phantom? Multiply that by 25 million.
Wow. That is crazy. It's crazy.
I mean, I'm not afraid to document this. Like, I hope that other people do it in other places. That's what's needed to open up. I want this to be a Harvard Business School case study or whatever for the market to truly appreciate that crypto is Bitcoin is the least interesting thing. Memes are the least exciting thing about crypto. But again, I'm not trying to tell you, I will show you. And I've been on this journey where I just don't want to convince you. I just want to have you use this technology without you realizing it. That is the end state. That will be the end state. No one knows how to draw a bicycle. No one knows how an airplane works. No one knows how the internet works or a credit card works, but they use it because it's such a killer product. Mobile plan that is cheaper and having access to tokenized dollars and earning yield is a core service that the world is very much in need for. And I'm going to deliver that to them.
That's amazing. Okay, so to touch base on the payment side, because you're talking about the infrastructure first, but the payment side, what do you imagine that brings? What does that evolve into? I mean, you're talking about bank accounts, you're talking about remittance, but I guess initially you're just saving a massive amount of fees just from credit cards and kind of, I guess what else? Like, what other fees are you saving with if people are using stables and not going through the traditional payment rails?
In this case, it's not cost savings. In this case, it's just higher monetization of that user. Because with Helium, with relying on a network of like hotspots, you're lowering cost of goods sold. Like that per gigabyte price goes down dramatically, but you're still selling that user, like the ARPU on that user is low-ish. It's in these markets like Mexico, it's $4, it's $5, it's no more than $10. Like data plans are, people can't afford like $100 plan from AT&T that you see in the US. Like the ARPU, average revenue per user, is actually quite lower in these places. So what do you have to do? You have to cut costs, right? You're not all of a sudden, you can't jack up prices for this user base. What you can do is always control costs, right? So you go and structurally reduce costs first. Then that user, you don't change the price on mobile. In fact, you might even lower that because you're saving so much, but you're making far more money on offering them financial products that they don't have access to. Everyone in Mexico, everyone in the world wants to hold dollars. And the on and off ramp, you're still going to charge them some fees, for sure. It's not free, but you're capturing more higher margin dollars there for that user that historically in that business, you never sold them that product. And so you on and off ramping fees, you might even waive those, but maybe some marginal fee, some conversion fee of, from peso to dollar, some swap fees, right? That you see in MetaMask. Maybe it's not that high, but there is a swap fee attached to that. Then with all those deposits, you can clip some yield, right? In the same way that, like, if you have a stable coin, a USDC stable coin, if for a long time, Circle or Coinbase didn't offer you any of that yield. What were they doing? Well, you had a USDC, you weren't earning any yield on that. Well, guess what? Circle Coinbase was using that, putting it in treasuries, getting 5%. Now they're sharing some of that revenue, some of that yield interest with you or to you. Similar here. So imagine collectively that user base, 20, 25 million, if they deposit, I don't know, $100, maybe, I don't know. Say that everyone deposits $100 and it's, 20 million user base. That's what, doing the math here, right? That's what, 2 billion?
That's crazy. That's so, wow.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm not doing this. Yeah, let's hypothetically run this number. Just make sure this is right. So say that each user has $100. Maybe it's less, but $100 average. And you have 20 million subscribers. You have now 2 billion in as a bank-ish, right? Then you earn like 5% on that. You're earning 100 million in interest a year. And then you share maybe half of that. By the way, most people, you look at JP Morgan reports, most people don't even have a money market account. They leave it in a checking account. Mm-hmm. It's crazy. But now you collapse that, right? Because you're not going to be greedy. You share maybe, you take maybe half of that, right? So you have 50 million. 50 million in straight bottom line interest income for a business that had a 5% EBITDA margin. Now extend that further. So let's run the math of the bottom line, just live. Bear with me. So you had 20 million subscribers, right? The average ARPU of that was $4, give or take, right? That business generated, what is it, $80 million. And you have an 8% EBITDA margin. So that's 6.4 million of bottom line for this business, which is not small. Largest mobile carrier in Mexico earns like less than $10 million. Or no, so maybe a bit more than that. It's actually more than that. But you know what I mean? Like, you are doubling your operating profit by offering stable coins and earning some of the yield.
It's funny because we were talking about feeling like we're late, and I just have to think. I mean, you explaining everything in detail, it makes it so obvious, right? I'm like, well, of course that's the future, right? The question is, like, if this is real, then why are people already not doing this? Like, obviously the first person I think that I've spoken to, obviously that's come up with this kind of a thesis, but do you think that, why is everyone not doing this yet? Is it just so new and you just have this unique insight and skill set that you're just like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna be able to pull this off first? Or do you think other people have maybe thought about this or maybe attempted it?
I think there's some people that are trying to do it. I truly don't know. And this is where, like, sometimes something that is incredibly obvious may not be for others. I think everyone will be doing this in the next 10 years. I have an incredible sense of urgency to do this. I'm public about it. I'm building in the open. I'm aware that might have a little bit of risk. You want to copy it? Go do it. Fine, go do it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, grow the pie. Bring 100 million users on chain. I've had a lot in this journey. It's been very rewarding because I've talked to a lot of people that I haven't heard. Like, I've heard the same response over and over. Everyone gets it. The message is very clear. I've refined it. I've crystallized the business that I want to acquire first. The strategy and the playbook is very clear. There are certainly a lot of risks to the business. It's not perfect. And it's a lot of times it's like, oh, you're trying to do something new. There's a lot of people that will say, look at that, hear that, and say, just go do it first. And then maybe I'll, maybe I'll get around. And there's execution risk. There's no one's done this before kind of risk. And that's fine. That's okay. And a lot of people may not know about Helium, might not know about DePIN, might not really appreciate how DePIN fintech combo works. By the way, look at Nubank's publicly traded Brazilian fintech company that's already doing this. They started as a fintech, launched their MVNO, now using USDC. Like, look at their stats. It's a public company. They're already doing it. Robinhood, you have Vlad, the CEO, talking about structurally his business is two sides of his business: traditional brokerage equities and like traditional brokerage and crypto. He says the crypto side of the house is an order of magnitude or more efficient than the traditional side. You think the world's not going to want to tokenize stocks, fixed income, financial products? Like, look at what BlackRock's going to do. I think the world is very much moving in this direction. I think most people might, because there's scar tissue of the longer you're in crypto, you become cynical. I think you should always be skeptical, but not cynical. The longer you exist in this space, you run the risk of becoming cynical, because going back to that example of a prediction market, say you invested in Augur, you lost your money there. You become cynical. It's very easy to become cynical. You're like, oh, fuck this. This is never going to work. I was so dumb. I lost my money. You're like, no, it pays to revisit old ideas because it's a very different time. And by the way, it's very different than pre and post November of last year. Very different time. Like, time is not linear. It's a very funky concept. Like, sometimes, it's like the what is it? Mark Twain quote, which is, or like, no, it's the Lenin quote. Vladimir, like Lenin, he said there are decades where nothing happens, and then there are like years where decades happen, kind of thing. And it's sort of this like relativity of time. Like, I think a lot of people anchor to time in a very simplistic manner to form opinions. Like, going back to how many years of experience do you have? I'm like, is that the best question that you can come up with? It's like, focus on the intensity, the density of time. You want to understand, like, what happened in November was that you had a complete 180 in the United States, the most important country to set the tone for the rest of the world. Total 180 in their stance on crypto. And the subsequent months, the executive orders that have come out, the pardoning of Ross, following through, even the Trump launch, like, you are crazy to not update your priors based on everything that has transpired. And if you're holding on to, I want to wait and see, I'm like, no. Like, you've been here, you've been paying attention. This is the moment where you have to jump on an opportunity. And we're talking about like your journey, like, and you have a grand thesis for NFTs. It's going to be right at some point. And because maybe you were a bit early, doesn't mean that you're not going to be incredibly right, like, going forward. You gotta survive, right? Because being too early is kind of indistinguishable from being wrong, kind of thing. But still, it pays to like be at that frontier and be willing to adapt. Like, adaptability is key, and I think crypto, you learn that either the really hard way, or you just kind of like adapt constantly and become, not a maximalist. And I don't know, man. Like, I think. Part of me wants to be really vocal about this because I want to inspire other people to do it in other places, or inspire them to give me a call and want to join the effort of doing this. It's a big task, right? So I've talked to other people that are looking to buy an MVNO in like Argentina or Uruguay, and they're like, hey, wait a minute, we heard that you were trying to do this in Mexico. What's your angle and thesis here? And I'll walk them through the playbook. I'm like, and they're like, oh, you want to help us do this? I'm like, absolutely. Yeah, of course. I'll help you do it. And just maybe as a parting thought, like, I don't know, maybe since I was very young, I was indoctrinated that like money was never the handicap to things. Not because I grew up in a privileged context in the sense that I had access to food, education, we could travel, like solid middle class, and my dad stretched for me to go to university. Like, that is privilege, 100%. But I think more importantly, it was like growing up, I went to liberal arts high school. It was always questioning why, like, there ought to be a better way to do this, like that mindset. And so I've always felt that like money's never the handicap. It should never be why you stop doing things. And a lot of times, how many times do you hear people say, oh God, I just need money to, I think if you are able to put food on the table and you're earning a steady income in your job, then I think at that point you look at yourself and you say, if I had a good idea, like, I'm going to really lean into that. And the best part of why I think America, the United States, is still the best country far and away in the world is because it is a culture that embraces reinventing yourself. It is a culture that embraces innovation and doesn't look at risk as something that is existential. It's more of, you need to constantly be pushing the limits. And that is wonderful. Like, that is the best thing ever. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think there's a place out there in the world that comes even close to that culture. And that's amazing, right? Because I think you always want to kind of, you should believe that if you have capital is not hard to come by, even in a world where 5% interest rates. If you have a good idea, you will be discovered, especially in an open source system like crypto, where you can start contributing to GitHub repo, join a community. It is open source. The beauty of crypto is you will be discovered faster. And oh, by the way, it doesn't matter if you went to Harvard or community college. If you're smart, the probability of you being discovered and funded in this space is bar none. It is the best place for you to be discovered. And honestly, that, again, going back to like the very simple thesis of why crypto is going to be huge is you take the long view that something always good comes out of open source innovation. The creative process of that, the compounding effects of the rapid evolution of ideas exchanges. Sometimes it's chaotic, sometimes things break, but it hardens over time. And if it doesn't absolutely kill you, it just becomes stronger and stronger, kind of like the anti-fragile concept of Taleb. Like, I think crypto is very much that, and you need that core principle to build really important infrastructure for the world, like finance, moving money, and securing things in a digital context. Like, it has to be open source. It has to be battle tested that way. And something good will come out of that. So it's just really a word of encouragement, because you could also have money but not be willing to take risk, and you become complacent. You don't want to lose it. And again, I just think that there's a lot of value in putting like a safety, like a part of your portfolio that is super safe, and not have to think about, like, if you lose it all, like, but once you do that, and if, I hope everyone can be in that position, which by the way is not as much as you think, but it's always like, yeah, optimize for, just if you have a unique insight, lean into that, and you will get discovered, you will get funded. It's either by you or me or someone else in this space will take a bet on you. Like, it is like, I'll always like believe that will be the case, because the moment that's not the case, we've sort of lost the plot as humanity. You know what I mean? We are humans because we innovate.
I love that. Okay, so you're talking 20 million users. That is a huge amount for crypto. What kind of blockchain infrastructure? And you did say that blockchain infrastructure is ready, but still, I mean, that's going to be a really heavy. I don't know. Like, is it going to be ETH? Is it going to be Solana? Like what? How do you build something that is not going to be a network that's not going to be not have issues?
I don't know for certainty. I think ultimately it's one of those things where you push the limit, and you kind of at that point have a not a bad problem to have kind of thing. But I do think that there are certain infrastructure out there of high throughput blockchains that can support this type of usage. It's not like incredibly demanding. Like in my portfolio, you have a company like Off the Grid, which is Gunzilla. Beautiful game. It's actually a game. It's fun, and they've gotten a lot of traction. I forget the number of users, but most of those users don't even know it's crypto. It's just a fun game to play, and they have they're deploying, and they have their own Avalanche L1. They're called L1s now, but it was like subnet. Look at that, and that's quite encouraging. Gives me confidence to go and deploy as in a similar manner. I have other, like, that's the edge that I have, which is through my portfolio. I've been able to validate the tech through folks like Layer Zero from an interoperability standpoint. If I'm using Helium and I have my own chain, how's that going to work? Well, you mint device NFTs, you bridge rewards, like it's doable, right? And so really have leaned on my portfolio to get a front row seat into the decision making process of a lot of companies that require and demand high throughput and usage, particularly gaming companies or perps and those type of like high frequency applications, and seeing where they are deploying has been instructive. And also the level of, I think a lot of this tech is not to downplay what is still, I think, very, it's difficult to run a chain. You have to recruit validators. You have to be on top of it. I'm not technically competent. I'm looking for a sharp, kind of co-founder type of role to lead that side of the house. So I'm not downplaying it, but I do think that the tech has come a long way. A lot of it is out of the box, and you get a lot of support from the foundations themselves. A ton of support, and that's really good. That's encouraging. My view is that every major application that hits scale will launch its own chain. In the same way that major financial institutions or companies will launch their own stablecoin, like PayPal has done, or a consortium. For me, it was interesting to get to a place where I can, as opposed to having a private equity fund that you have to constantly think in 10 years time and have to sell a business. Like, I never want to sell a business. I never want to sell this type of business. And so if you look at the evolution of private equity funds like KKR or Apollo, they eventually all went public to get permanent capital, to be in a position where they could really just be more capital efficient and not have to constantly fundraise and whatnot. Berkshire Hathaway is a hallmark example here. Like, he took a railroad and used that as a platform to then, basically create a holding company of sorts. And I think you can do that. And I've drawn a lot of inspiration from that type of model. But on the technical side, look, no one can agree on what the actual most important metric is. Everyone has their own TPS figures. I do believe high throughput blockchains are, in my interactions with all of these teams, you know, they differentiate on some parameters. But I think the most important criteria, you know, if I think of like the rubric of the things that I evaluated a lot of these different ecosystems, was the level of support that I would get from them, proof points of other projects deploying, the amount of other projects in the ecosystem. I looked at the L1, L2, kind of like deploying as an L2 or an L3. There are challenges to that, candidly, that I see just from an interop standpoint. And yeah, like there's a super chain thesis that, you know, has gotten a lot of traction. I think there's some value leakage in L1, L2 kind of dynamic. The fragmentation is somewhat there. I get encouraged of what I see in Avalanche, just the quality of the team. And by the way, if you were to ask me a year ago, I would have like not even have considered them, kind of thing. But it's really through my portfolio that I've gotten to really understand what they're building. It's kind of like a much more, it's the ability to launch an L1 with a lot of degrees of freedom on the governance side of things or the parameters that you can set. And so I think that type of flexibility, not be beholden to a provider. Like if you're an L2 and you want to deploy an L3, there's still some lock in there. I think that the L1 in an Avalanche context is much more, gives me more flexibility to tinker around depending on the amount of frequency, or tinker around these parameters as I go and build a chain. Because there's a lot of unknowns, and I think there's just more flexibility to run like a chain in that manner. And it feels a lot out of the box. It feels a lot of support from their team, very hands-on approach. And that matters to me. Like it ultimately is really good. Like in the same way that Solana has been incredibly successful in recruiting a lot of projects, is because they have a very centralized, unified, like BD team that is very hands-on. You see the same in other ecosystems. Like, and so I'm singling out different players, but I've been, you know, I mean, I'll be more public about it as we launch and whatnot, but it's been a very rewarding journey now, not just from an investing standpoint, but from a, hey, where can this actually be deployed? But yeah, you know, this could be an entire episode of the different decision making, like that whole evolution over the last couple of months has been very, very instructive. But I'll tell you, it's been more, I'm not the most technical person, but I do have the ability to validate a certain set of assumptions and hypotheses with smart founders that have gone through this process themselves. And it is really leaning on their experience and their own process to then inform mine.
10 years from now, what markets is Inversion kind of involved with, right? Because we talked about telecom, but all of them.
Well, I mean, like obviously I do believe that stablecoins will totally transform how businesses operate. It will streamline their operations in a meaningful way. Like every business in the world has friction. There ought to be a better way to do these things. Every business pays payment processing fees 2, 3, 4, 5%, maybe more. Some of them have high chargeback rates, meaning fraud, right? It could be as low as 4%. It could be up high as 20%. All that goes away when you use stablecoins. And that affects every business. I don't think the challenge and the opportunity with this playbook is, this strategy is, again, it's what business can I buy today at the right price with great distribution, with it making the least amount of stacked assumptions. I'll say it again. What business can I buy today at the best price that has great distribution, and I can run this playbook of ripping and replacing infrastructure that the customer doesn't see to lower costs with the least amount of stacked assumptions. So what are stacked assumptions? What businesses you don't want to go buy? Retail business. Why? Because you don't want to assume that the customer is ever going to swap or not use his American Express or Visa and use a stablecoin to pay. That is an assumption that I'm not going to make today. In 10 years, yes. Why? Because at that point, Stripe is going to be very much churning, like running on stablecoins. PayPal, Shopify, all the major players in finance will have their own stablecoin. So I don't have to actually do it myself. I never want to be doing this evangelization. I never want to build distribution. There are core principles, tenets of inversion. Never build distribution, never compete, always partner. You know what I mean? Like, these are core principles, like no stacked assumptions. In a playbook like DePIN that I described with Helium, there's no stacked assumptions. I'm not assuming that the customer is going to ever change anything. The customer might not even realize what they actually will never know what is happening under the hood. But I am saving 30, 40, 50, maybe upwards of 60% on cost of goods sold. No stacked assumptions. And by the way, always focus on costs. You control costs. I never want to assume that revenue is going to grow 40%, that I'm going to sell people NFTs. Like, is that interesting? Yeah. Could you buy Hermes? Yeah. I mean, you had some really interesting, in this evolution of basically looking at hundreds of businesses. Like, there's some really encouraging proof points that you know better than anyone around NFT data. Like, the LVMH experiments have been constructive. Nike Artifact I don't know why they got out of that business. But, the artifact data was interesting. Not perfect, but decent. There have been like death by 1,000 pilots in the NFT world that you know very well, but I think there are very encouraging data points there. Like, digital artifacts are going to be a thing. People will want to have a digital closet that's empty today. You will want to have a digital identity. That the only way to prove that is with scarce, provably scarce digital artifacts. That will be a thing. There will come a time and a place in the next 10 years where I will buy maybe Hermes if I can. Why? Because I will want to offer that customer a digital Birkin bag. People are not buying Birkin bags because they're like aesthetically, they're very pleasing for people. They're not buying them because you can fit the water bottle better than a traditional like IKEA bag. It's a beveled good. That extends into the digital world. As we spend more time in the digital world, people will want ways to differentiate. It's human psychology. Is it at the right price? Maybe not now. Hermes is going through like some sort of transition, but it's an interesting business. If I had the money, I would be looking at it closely. Stuff like that, you know what I mean? Like provenance. There are some businesses that actually will die too. So you got to be careful about where value kind of the value leakage, and so to speak. You can't necessarily look at an industry like auction houses and say, "Oh, I can just run it in a digital manner." I'm like, no, wait a minute, maybe that entire business collapses on its own. But telecom alone, nothing. If I just stop there, I think that would be great. Like the blurred lines of telecom and fintech are converging. Can I run the largest telecom fintech company in the world? I think that would be a great outcome. Great outcome. Like, there's a reason why SoftBank is SoftBank. Tencent is also a company that I draw a lot of inspiration from. Like, Tencent built WeChat. It's a social platform. Like WhatsApp, is pervasive. So you always want to start with something so critical. Coordination, social. We're a social species. We like to communicate. Once you do that, you have attention. Once you have attention, Tencent basically layered everything in that app. That to me has always been a window into how younger generations' consumer behavior is going to go. And you're starting with mobile fintech. Once you do that, you can layer a whole suite of products around that. Because stablecoins as Patrick, or I think it was Patrick Collison, one of the brothers who founded Stripe, when they acquired Bridge, which is this API for stablecoins, he said, stablecoins are room temperature semiconductors for like financial system. And I mean, that's saying a lot. You remove friction from an equation, you create nonlinear outcomes. When money moves at the speed of light, my imagination doesn't stretch that far, but I'm here to back people and to use them in this platform that I'm constructing, because I do think that stablecoins will open up so many different use cases that are going to totally blow our minds. In the same way that the smartphone, the first iPhone, how many people imagined that you would have Uber and Netflix and do everything on the phone? I mean, shit, half the people at that time, from Nokia to BlackBerry, all discredited like the smartphone. Steve Ballmer of Microsoft, genius, but he said, "Oh, no one's going to want to use this. People are going to want their Walkman and their Palm Pilot and all this crap." Boy, was he wrong. Are we? But you know what I mean, like, and so it's a sort of constant reminder. Like, studying history is a good reminder. Like, once stablecoins really get working, I mean, it's gonna create so many different. It's gonna unlock so many different type of business models. It will change consumer behavior purely because things just move at the speed of light. Moving money at the speed of light seamlessly is explosive. It's like the most. I think we'll look back on that and be like, "Holy shit! That was it. that was it enough to go super long the space and innovate in the space in and around that area.
Amazing. That's awesome. I mean, you have to come back in like 3 months and give an update or something. Every few months, jump back on. But amazing, Santi. This has been an incredible conversation. But it's time for the closing questions.
Okay.
Alrighty. What is the best investment advice you've ever received?
That's a great question. Thinking in probabilities is probably one of the more instructive things. Never in binary states. Like always be thinking in probabilities. Because if you think in probabilities, you constantly update those probabilities. They're not static. That forces you to constantly process new information. And so what I may be saying right now is it's a expected probability. There's versions. It forces you to think in the alternative, which is the true downside, the true upside, and everything in the middle, and ascribe probabilities. And by doing that exercise constantly, it surfaces insights. It also, I think, makes you either a better builder and investor because you have to stress test these things, right? And so I think so many times you're just sort of like very rigid on, oh, Bitcoin's going to go to 100,000. Well, no, like maybe that's probability weighted, maybe it's not. But if it's probability weighted, you've entertained different outcomes and scenarios, and I think that's a very useful exercise when you're investing. And maybe the second one, at a more personal level, is always invest in yourself first. Always. When you walk in an airline, it's the best advice you ever get. You have to put on your oxygen mask first before helping others. And that is very useful. The best investment that you can make is on yourself, and education and therapy. Take care of yourself. I think mental well-being is physical and mental well-being is incredibly important because it is a very demanding sport. It's a very competitive field. These things do matter. And oftentimes, we play the card of type A, no pain, no gain. It's like, know when to quit. It's important.
That's awesome. All right. What trend is currently overhyped and what is underhyped?
Overhyped AI.
Overhyped AI. Overhyped.
Overhyped.
Really?
Don't get me wrong. I think the impact is going to be very profound. But even DeepSeek very clearly told you over the weekend that you've had this massive investment in capex. People bought tons of hardware, H100s. You have companies like OpenAI really pricing this probably too high, and you just had someone with $5-6 million just come out with a better model. And so I think that tells you a lot about the state of the industry. I went into this year with a prediction that Nvidia is the most important stock to follow, more so than the Fed funds rate. Today you had the Fed come out saying that they're bullish for markets, but my point there is we've seen this in crypto. It's like there's a lot of hype in what AI will do, and don't get me wrong, I think it will happen. But it's never about the impact that technology will have. It's like, when does that happen? And I think there's naturally always a spread between the expectation and the reality. And you have a certain amount of time to close that gap. And I think DeepSeek compressed that time, and the market will become more impatient because now all of a sudden analysts, and earnings season just started. Analysts will say, wait a minute, you spent how much on H100s? Well, wait a minute, but what about DeepSeek? Like, when is this actually going to show in the P&L? When are you actually going to cut costs? This is going to grow the bottom line 20-30%? Like, without DeepSeek, maybe you had 1 or 2, maybe at least a year or 2 to show that, maybe 3. Now, I don't think companies have that much more time because the market now was shown, and Pandora's box was open, which said, wait a minute, you can do this in a far cheaper manner. So if you can do that in a far cheaper manner, and at the same effective, it's quite effective, then it forces the question around, why are you spending this much, and when am I going to see the P&L impact? Tying it back to inversion, that's why I get excited. AI, everyone's focused on AI. When everyone's focused on AI, it's like table stakes. It's like everyone is doing it. Crypto's not hyped in this particular. The P&L impact that crypto will have on a company's balance sheet is greater than AI, and it's certainly more overlooked. Like the cost savings that I just walked through on the Helium playbook for the MVNO, that's real, and everyone's overlooking that. Could you run AI in that playbook? You best believe I'm going to use AI. But every MVNO is going to use AI to acquire customers more efficiently, to run customer service more efficiently, to do all this crap more efficiently on the back end. But that might squeeze out another 5% gain, maybe a bit more. I don't know. Hard to quantify. But it's definitely not going to I think, not going to cut costs in the way that DePIN will. And that's what's so exciting too.
I love that. I was expecting you to say that was the underhyped thing, but
No.
that was the overhyped. What do you think is underhyped?
Underhyped is again the playbook that I'm running at Inversion.
Yeah.
I think the underhyped is the P&L impact that crypto will have.
No one's talking about it yet.
No one's talking about it yet, and it will be very material, be very real, and more so than people anticipate. And boy, that will be the day where people will be like, okay, crypto truly is the settlement layer of the internet. And you know that it's again, think 5% EBITDA margin to 20. That's real. That's overlooked.
Very cool. All right, so you could have dinner with any historical figure, past or present. Who would it be?
I'd like to meet Michael Jordan. I hope I can meet him one day. I'm obsessed with talking to athletes because, like, there's something about, like, you meet a professional cyclist, for instance. There is very little luck there. There's a lot of skill. Like Formula One, there's a lot of luck. You have to basically pay $20 million to get a seat at the grid. Cycling, it is raw. Like, you either can pump watts or you don't. And I think that I find that really fascinating because I always like to ask, and I've met a few of these professional athletes, and I always ask them, like, at what point in your journey did you realize you were set up for greatness, that you could be like the top in your profession? Like, when did it click for you? What needed to happen, and what did you do? And really understanding and dissecting that process is, it's like I find it fascinating. And someone like Michael Jordan, like, you know, I've listened to the founder's episodes. He has done 2 or 3 of them. There's something about him that he's just wired very differently. And I think maybe it was his parents, the way he negotiated the contract with Nike, the way he was just like so hard on his teammates, his work ethic, his uber competitive drive, like The Last Dance. I watched that, and that to me was like
amazing.
It just sparked something in me that I was like, I need to meet this person in real life. And, you know, maybe it's something about like never meet your heroes kind of thing. But I would like to. And look, I think the documentary painted a really good picture of him, which he's not perfect. Like, is he a perfect human being? No. Like, and I think it's important to like document that of like highly successful people, which is the journey is never a straight line. They're not perfect. They all have their flaws, and yeah, I think, but yeah, it'd probably be someone like Michael Jordan, like, you know, and just really maybe ask him a few questions. Just not even ask him a question, just like observe him. Like, you know, like just, there's something really powerful that happened in my life, which was, I remember going to Harvard summer school when I was in middle school, or it was high school. I think it was high school. You could go like summer and take classes. And it was like a very defining moment in my life because before going, you have this vision of Harvard, which is the pinnacle of academia, the ivory tower, so untenable, so far. You get good grades, you want to apply to Harvard, but there's something just so mythical about it. And it's like going to Mount Olympia and meeting like the Greek gods. But once you're there, you're like, yeah, there's smart people here, but it makes it relatable. And you're like, I can, like, they're human. They're not gods. There might be demigods here and there, but they're human. And you see a part of yourself in some of them. You're like, it inspires you to compete. It gives you the confidence to buy that lottery ticket and say, no, I can strike it. Like, I'm not too far off. Like, I can make it here. And then it makes you got to believe that. Sometimes people have nervous breakdowns. Like, there's countless case studies of like valedictorians going to Harvard and really breaking down. And so it forces the question, like with Malcolm Gladwell has a good book about this. Like, do you want to be a big fish in a small pond or a small fish in a big pond? And I don't have a good answer for that. But I do think that it's always nice to be able to dip your feet in a big, massive pond and say, hey, the water's not that cold. It's not the same water as a small pond. Well, I can swim here. I can get it. And maybe I have to go to a small pond and maybe iterate on a few things before I come back. But just tasting that, going to Harvard summer school was like, okay. And I think that is, again, I think the message that I'm trying to convey here is, I heard it once, which is you always want to have a champion in your life that is not your parents. It has to be an external figure. And it doesn't have to be like a Michael Jordan figure. It could be, for me, it was my finance professor freshman year at university. I would go back and have lunch with her. Because, again, going back to something I said earlier, had that not happened, that not been my finance professor, my freshman first semester of college, I would have never believed that I could have get into an investment bank and I would have never believed that I could make it to the best investment bank that I'd never recruited in my college, which was not a target school, it was BU. But she was like, no, you can do it. It's going to be hard, but you can do it. And she had to just say that once for me to, that was the lottery ticket. And I was slightly delusional, but I believed it. And then it happened. There was luck in that equation, 100%. But you want, like having a champion that you look up to and say, Andrew, and extend a hand and just touching you. And you're like, it's just electric. You're like, fuck yes. Yes, I can do it. And I think a lot of times we're too afraid. And I make these mistakes often. Like I was handicapping myself in the vision for inversion. I'm like, why? And someone else had to come and say why. Like why? What's stopping you? And I think it's always like the why is important. It's instructive. And like, it's like, why can't you be the best? So like one podcast, I think it was Logan's or someone titled it, I want to be the best inversion, the best investor in the world. And I was like, God, this is such a ridiculous title. And then I'm like, well, why not? And I think it goes back to, it goes to an important distinction that I've tried to make in my life, which is the difference between being arrogant and being confident. And by the way, most people will, if you're confident, will take you as arrogant. So you can't control how other people perceive you. And there's also an element of having to let go of that. Like, the ego of the perception of how people will, like maybe when you struck out and said, I want to build the first NFT fund, people are like, this guy's, delusional, crazy, arrogant, whatever. But part of you had to just go and do it and say, I don't fucking care what other people think. I believe in this and I'm going to do it. And you were confident. I remember I'm like, this guy's confident. He's not arrogant because you could just sense the difference, And I think like it's a fine line, but I think champions really inspire you to be confident and remove some insecurity. The difference between being confident and arrogant is, I think, being insecure. And if you know your identity, if you know what you stand for, your core principles, your values, your process, your frameworks, your discipline, I think you can be incredibly confident and slightly delusional. To buy that lottery ticket and then show up to practice at 5 a.m. or whatever Michael Jordan was doing, It's a bit of everything, but most people maybe felt that Michael Jordan, like all the athletes that constantly win, they're incredibly arrogant, but I don't think so. I think they're just very confident.
That was awesome. All right, last question. What does success look like for you?
Leaving this world better than it was, having kids, family, positively transforming someone else's life. Doesn't have to be hundreds of millions of people, just one. Finding a cure for my sister. That would be the most important one. If it's not for her, then at least for someone else who suffers a similar condition. And if I can't do that, well, at least funding research for that. Onboarding like 100 million users or 1 billion users to crypto.
That's awesome. All right, Santi, man, this was amazing. I mean, I want to keep going. This is awesome. But all right, you got to come back on again in some months. I want give everyone an update. But thank you so much. This was incredible. Where can people find you and learn more about Inversion?
This has been probably the most transparent, open I've been about Inversion. But I like to build in the open, so Twitter is the best venue for that. I just am constantly shit posting for a living, or was. Now I'm still, but probably Twitter. That's the place where I can find. And yeah, look, listen, I really enjoyed it. It felt like I love this because it just was a conversation. I also wanted to ask you a bunch of questions because then I think people should hear your story because I was very intrigued when I saw you build the fund, and I still think it's I personally want to learn about that. So maybe we can do another one where it's a bit more back and forth, not just asking me questions.
Deal.
All right.
Amazing. Santi, man, thank you. Talk soon.
Of course, man. Thank you so much for having me, and hopefully it was useful. I appreciate it.